Hello and welcome once again to the Cash Game Locks podcast. I'm Big Italy 42 here with Spencer Limbach at Spencer_JL, the author of your great piece here. And we're talking about some cash game lineups for FanDuel, DraftKings, tentative lineups, of course, and then some other options if you want to make your own, get creative with this, but trying to find some safe options also with some upside. Starting off at FanDuel here, you've got Cam Newton locked in, the guy who won multiple people $1 million+ last week. And, I mean, he's got a nice high floor, high ceiling, and he's one of those guys that you just know he's not going to kill your team. He certainly has upside. He doesn't always need to run and throw 300, 400 yards like he did last week. But at the same time, I mean, he's still the main piece in the offense, and he's going to run, and he's going to throw the ball downfield. And he makes the most out of the least amount of talent of probably any quarterback in the league.
Yeah, and I mentioned in this article that, Cam Newton isn't necessarily a lock. I'm also liking Aaron Rodgers and Tyrod Taylor, just kind of three different price points there. Rodgers obviously more expensive, Taylor a little bit of a bargain. But Cam just kind of fit well with what I'm trying to do at the other positions. And like you said, I mean, even though that's a low-totaled game at Tampa Bay this week, all the offensive production runs through him. And, it's really nice to have a quarterback who gets goal line carries too. So, maybe he can get 20, 30 yards rushing and a touchdown. I mean, that's 10 points right there. So, that really raises his floor, and I think he's a pretty safe cash game play for that reason.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And then going over to running back, we can go ahead and just lump these two together. These are going to be two very popular plays, and rightfully so. Carlos Williams, probably going to be the highest owned player in any position, I would imagine, this week. I think you think the same. He's a guy that is stepping into a bigger role with LaShawn McCoy out. He's also a guy that's been productive with LaShawn McCoy in. He's got a touchdown in each game, averaging almost 8 yards a carry, which very unsustainable. But he's been efficient. He's way too cheap, and you kind of just have to get him in your cash games because he's going to be so popular. And then Latavius Murray, like you mentioned here, 27 touches a game. I mean, he just makes a lot of sense, too, against that terrible Chicago defense.
Yeah, and I mean, just really you're getting Adrian Peterson-like volume for a cheaper price point there. I mean, 27 touches per game. And, we said it last week, too, that he was, still really involved when Oakland got blown out against Cincinnati in week 1. So he's involved in the passing game. He's basically their only threat in the red zone. They just feed him the ball and hope he gets in the end zone, which worked out really well last week at Cleveland. So against Chicago, again this week, Chicago's defense, really nothing to be afraid of. Actually, probably bottom 5 rush defense and pass defense. We'll probably touch on that in a little bit here. So I think both of these guys are underpriced given their situation. Obviously, Carlos Williams stepping into a bigger role. And Lat Murray, he's kind of proven himself as a legitimate RB1, amongst the likes of Peterson and Forte, and I mean, for $1,000 less than them, I think that's a pretty safe cash game play.
Yeah, and especially considering you got tough matchups for those guys, like you said. So it just makes a lot of sense to get yourself. You got to at least get Carlos Williams. I have both these guys in my cash game lineup as well. Next up, you've got AJ Green, and this is a guy who had a monster game last week. Chiefs allowing the most points to wide receivers of any team in all of football. Their strength generally is their defensive line. They haven't got a lot of pressure. Andy Dalton hasn't taken a lot of pressure either. Bengals offensive lines looked good. He's just in a great spot, and he's still priced, just below these elite talents. I mean, $1,000 less than Julio Jones this week with similar floor and upside here. Only difference being that the Bengals do have other options, but AJ Green's not probably going to find a better spot than this week.
Yeah, and I mean, it's the scales are kind of tipping in his favor, whereas Cincinnati's, they're passing a little more than usual. Not giving Jeremy Hill quite as many carries. So that really works out in A.J. Green's favor, along with, like you said, the way to beat Kansas City is through the air. As we saw, they gave up production to DeAndre Hopkins, Emmanuel Sanders, and Randall Cobb 3 weeks in a row. They've pretty much been some of the higher scoring wide receivers in fantasy. So A.J. Green, I'm expecting him to keep the streak going. Probably won't have quite the performance he had last week. I'm guessing Kansas City will dedicate quite a few resources to him, shutting him down, but still I'm expecting another solid week.
Yeah, absolutely. And then next up, Amari Cooper, another Raiders player. And we were talking a little bit before the show. It kind of feels weird playing so many Raiders, but this offense has looked good. These guys have been, they really haven't been dependent on game flow either, because up, down really hasn't mattered. These Murray and Cooper both been main targets. And, Amari Cooper's got over 100 yards in 2 straight games, like you said. And Derek Carr and he have some really great rapport already. And he's getting 10 targets a game over the last couple weeks, too. So the volume's there and the big play upside's there. And, he still hasn't had one of those actual breakout games either yet.
Yeah, I don't see anyone in this price range that has, the same volume as Amari Cooper. So you have to feel comfortable with that. Maybe you could argue Jordan Matthews, but, some weather concerns in that Philadelphia-Washington game kind of makes it easier to go with Cooper over him. But yeah, like you said, he's getting 10-plus targets, making good on them, and he's a guy who can really do things after the catch. He can break that big, long touchdown, as we saw a couple weeks ago against the Ravens. So, you feel good about his floor, you feel good about his upside, and I think he's a great wide receiver too.
Yeah, that's a great call there. And your final guy here, an X-Raider actually, not for very long. It's James Jones. Really just stepped right back into the Packers offense as, an elite option. He's scored touchdown in every game, getting a solid amount of targets, and facing a 49ers secondary that might quite possibly be the worst in all of football right now. So at $6,000, he's a tremendous value this week.
Yeah, he's probably the biggest beneficiary of Jordan Nelson's injury, actually. So, Randall Cobb gets a nice bump, but James Jones, all of a sudden is a legitimate fantasy player week to week. And at San Francisco, that secondary, they've been pretty bad over the past few weeks. They got, kind of dismantled by that Pittsburgh offense and then Arizona last week. So, you have the best quarterback in football going against them this time. I don't think they're going to get things right, this Sunday. So James Jones, another quality cheap play. I really like him at $6K.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense there. Moving on here to tight end, and if you happen to know, this is a Rob Gronkowski-less week. So obviously, with no Gronk, you got to look for a guy with safety and upside, and Greg Olsen is the epitome of safety and upside. We saw last week, had a huge game, 134 yards and 2 touchdowns, and he actually has the same number of targets as Gronk over the first 3 weeks. So volume pass catcher with upside. He's really the only red zone threat that they have outside of Cam Newton himself. So, if they're scoring points in this game, you got to imagine that this Newton-Olsen combo not only going to be popular, but they're going to account for just about every touchdown as they have all season.
Yeah, and 25 targets over the past 2 weeks. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I imagine that's probably more than about a handful of wide receivers like Julio Jones, maybe Odell Beckham, and A.J. Green. So, all the volume's going his way. He is the number 1 receiver in Carolina. The only concern here, as I said before, low-scoring game, and maybe Tampa Bay, since they know that Olsen is, their only receiving threat, they might try to take him away. But I'm not sure. The past 2 weeks, that's kind of been the game plan for the opposing teams, and it still hasn't happened. So on top of that, I don't really see any other tight ends that really spark my interest. Maybe Jason Witten, he's $6K, but he has risk as well with without Tony Romo throwing him the ball. So I think Greg Olsen, for that reason, best floor, best upside combination at tight end, and he's probably still underpriced at 6.3K, just considering his production over the past 2 weeks.
Yeah, and it certainly raises your team's floor pairing someone with your quarterback, and Newton obviously the top option there in that offense. Kicker, you went with Matt Bryant. Not much analysis necessary. You've got him here. Great offense, kicking in a dome. That's about all you need to know.
Yeah. And, he's put up some good fantasy performances, in previous weeks. So, he's probably the best cheaper kicker under 5K.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you've got the Arizona Cardinals, who have been an absolutely incredible defense over the first 3 weeks, scoring touchdowns, getting sacks, turnovers, doing everything. They're in a great spot again this week against the St. Louis offense. It's just absolutely awful. If you're not paying the extra money for the Seahawks, which I don't think is necessarily something you need to do, Cardinals are the team I've got locked into my lineup as well.
Yeah, and it helps that they're at home. That Seattle or St. Louis offense is just completely off the rails right now. They have no playmakers to keep the defense honest, so could be another big week for Arizona.
Yep. And then some similarities here in your DraftKings lineup. But first off, going with the quarterback who's just way, way too cheap, considering he's a top 5 fantasy quarterback so far this season. Tyrod Taylor, $5,800. I mean, if you're playing cash games on DraftKings, you can always go a different route. I just don't know why you would this week. Giants giving up the most yards per game through the air of any team in the NFL. So Tyrod Taylor under 6K just makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, and I said this in the FanDuel breakdown that I like Taylor, Rodgers, and Newton. So considering that he's so cheap on DraftKings, it kind of made that decision a little bit easier to go his way and just, spend up in other positions. So since I have him locked in here in this DraftKings lineup, I was able to snag Julio Jones in place of AJ Green, and that's kind of a nice little way to diversify. Just in case some things with AJ Green don't go as expected, and Julio Jones, one of the probably the most consistent wide receiver in football right now, especially a PPR site like DraftKings. You have to really love his floor upside combination. So basically, those are the two differences that I have. Also on DraftKings, you have the flex spot. I went with Danny Woodhead here. He's still cheap, 4,600. Could catch a handful of passes out of the backfield. And I actually just read earlier today that San Diego has 3 offensive linemen that are potentially going to miss this game. So I'm willing to bet that Phillip Rivers will be throwing more than usual, even though Cleveland has a pretty bad pass defense or running defense. So if that's the case, Danny Woodhead will likely be in on those passing packages, getting some receptions out of the backfield, just kind of as extended handoffs there. So I really like him for the price as a flex filler.
Yeah, and we know that Phillip Rivers loves the short passing game even without injuries on the offensive line. So he's the guy that should get plenty involved in, especially like you said, red zone looks. I mean, if you get red zone looks with a guy at that price, then he gets carries, he gets targets in the red zone. So definitely like the nice high floor and ceiling with a guy like Woodhead there. And that's going to wrap things up for this week. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. He's at Spencer_JL. And check out the rest of our great NFL content for you for this weekend. And we'll see you guys next week.